Now, one of the Philippines' most prominent journalists has been found guilty of cyber libel in a case seen as a major blow to press freedom. Charges were brought against Maria Ressa after her news website, RAPPLER, published a story linking a businessman to a High Court judge 5 years ago. It's one of several charges laid against RAPPLER, which has highlighted extrajudicial killings and abuses during President Rodrigo Duterte's time in office. Ressa is expected to appeal the conviction, which carries a sentence of up to 6 years in prison.
I appeal to you, the journalists in this room, the Filipinos who are listening, to protect your rights. We are meant to be a cautionary tale. We are meant to make you afraid, right? So I appeal again. Don't be afraid, because if you don't use your rights, you will lose them. If we don't challenge a brazen move to try to roll back the rights guaranteed in the Constitution, we will lose them.
Well, our correspondent Jamila Alandogan joins us live now from outside the court in Manila. Jamila, we heard Maria Ressa there sounding very defiant. She's vowed to fight this. So what happens now?
Well, we were just with her as well, and basically she said that this was quite devastating, although she is expecting it. She said she has 7 other cases to face. Now, she's going to be able to post bail. I believe the previous bail that she posted remains active. Now, she has to bring her case to the Court of Appeals, and then when it doesn't work for her again, she can bring it up all the way to the Supreme Court. But really, you know, her facing the press today, there is that shock, that level of shock, that although everybody knew somehow that this might be the decision of the court, it was still shocking. It was devastating. She also appealed to Facebook. She said Maria basically said that Facebook has a responsibility to do its job in making sure that the weaponization of social media, that Facebook is not used as a platform to demonize journalists. The attack against journalists in the Philippines did not start this year. It started in 2016 when a lot of posts against journalists started to propagate in 2016 until now. She said the journalists have been accused of bias, have been labeled as criminals. She said that may have taken a while before she was convicted today, but basically she's calling on social media platforms to be much more responsible. Now, this is not the first time, though, and not the only case that journalists are facing. As you know, just over a month ago, the biggest media network was shut down. ABS-CBN also was shut down because of its failure to renew its license. There was also another broadsheet that was also threatened to be closed. So no, the United Nations, all other rights organizations have called this, of course, a dark day in journalism, but this is not new. This has been going on for the last 4 years, although there is no official reaction again from the Philippine government at this point, from the Office of the President. You know, many actually believe that this has been the case simply because Duterte has basically waged a war against journalists by calling them fake news. For the previous statement he made a few years ago that some journalists do deserve to be killed. So right now at this point, Maria Ressa still is at her press conference. She's sharing her sentiments with other journalists. A lot of people say they will continue to support Maria. They think that this is the first time that basically cyber libel was weaponized. It was something that was passed during the previous administration, but a lot of rights groups over the past few years have actually been calling on the government to decriminalize libel. They worry, though, that the case of Maria, despite being prominent, actually has a greater impact to lesser-known community journalists who may not have the same gravitas, who will feel intimidated every time they write a story, every time they they speak truth to power, every time they face bigger challenges and go against powerful people.
Jamila Alandogan there, following all those developments for us on the ground in Manila. Thanks very much, Jamila.
Well, a verdict is expected shortly in the Philippines in the libel trial of a high-profile journalist, Maria Ressa. She's the editor of the RAPPLER news website, and she's facing a possible jail sentence of up to 7 years if found guilty. But she and human rights campaigners say she's been targeted because of her website's criticism of the country's president, Rodrigo Duterte. So we'll bring you any updates on that as they happen.
Interesting.
Right, some breaking news now from the Philippines, where a guilty verdict has been delivered in the libel trial of the high-profile journalist Maria Ressa. She's the editor of the RAPPLER news website and now faces a possible jail sentence of up to 7 years. She and human rights campaigners say she's been targeted because of her website's criticism of the country's president, Rodrigo Duterte. And we will bring you more updates on that as it happens.
Really interesting.
Right, I just want to return to our breaking news this hour, which comes from the Philippines, where a guilty verdict's been delivered in a libel trial against the high-profile journalist Maria Ressa. She is the editor of a website called RAPPLER. She's now facing a possible jail sentence of up to 7 years. She and human rights campaigners, though, say she's been targeted because of her website's criticism of the country's president, Rodrigo Duterte. Well, let's get right up to date with Howard Johnson, who's our correspondent, joining us now. Howard, just talk us through the details of this case.
Well, yeah, in the last half an hour or so, we've heard this verdict that, yes, Maria Ressa is guilty of cyber libel, alongside Reynaldo Santos Jr. He was the gentleman who wrote the article for RAPPLER back in 2012, some 8 years ago. This case was made active in 2016, around 2016, when it was republished. According to the Department of Justice, they said that the changing of a typo in the story made it available to be prosecuted. And what we've heard today is that she could face up to 60 years in jail. That was the sentence, and that she's been ordered, and RAPPLER have been ordered to pay the claimant Wilfredo Keng, a businessman who said that he had been slighted by this article, defamed by the article that made allegations that he was involved in drug smuggling and human trafficking, allegations he always denied. They've been ordered to pay 400,000 Philippine pesos in damages. The judge said that RAPPLER didn't offer proof to prove the allegations against him. They cited an intelligence report during this hearing, and that intelligence report was never actually shown to the courtroom. And so what they were saying was that that RAPPLER didn't do enough to verify this intelligence report to show it to the court. The judge said that freedom of the press cannot be used as a defense against this kind of journalism that the judge said wasn't up to standard. It wasn't good enough. They said that they needed to verify their facts before they published the story without checking the facts.
And Howard, you said the judge referenced freedom of the press. This case is really being seen as a test case of freedom of the press in the Philippines. Briefly, if you can.
Well, that's because there have been 11 cases filed against RAPPLER in the last few years. They see that President Duterte has attacked RAPPLER journalists. He even said to one of them that I will send you to jail without bail. He said that to one of their star reporters. So people are linking the two together. These 11 cases that came in the last couple of years and the verdict we heard today.
Howard Johnson in Manila, thanks very much for that. I'll be back in a few minutes with the headlines. Thanks for watching.
Appreciate it. All right, turning to other news now, and Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte has been accused of targeting members of the media for unfavorable coverage. One high-profile journalist faces court on Monday to see whether she'll be jailed on cyber libel charges. Maria Ressa says it's a case that affects every Filipino. Rahul Radhakrishnan has more.
The co-founder and CEO of independent news site RAPPLER is facing up to 12 years in jail. She says the charges against her are a government ploy to intimidate all critical voices, but she refuses to be silenced.
All right, be quiet or you're next, and I think that's part of the reason why I've been targeted.
The case stems from a report published by RAPPLER on corruption allegations. The website has probed President Rodrigo Duterte's deadly anti-drug crackdown. Authorities say they're not targeting anyone, but simply enforcing the law.
If I am convicted, the court will be changing the period of prescription for libel, for cyber libel, from 1 year to 12 years. That's not just for me, that's for every Filipino. That's huge to do that.
Another broadcaster, ABS-CBN, which was critical of the country's leadership, was forced off air last month. And ahead of the verdict, Ressa says she is scared, but remains defiant. Rahul Radhakrishnan, TRT World.
Okay, so Anna Santos is there for us in Manila reporting on this. Hi, Anna. Just briefly describe for us the mood where you are.
We just got notice just a few seconds ago that the court has already decided that it is a conviction for Maria Ressa today on cyber libel. So judgment day today came out to show that it's a conviction. We are waiting now for details about what the details of that conviction is. What are the choices here? So the judge may issue a fine, right, for the cyber libel case. And most likely, if there's a fine that is issued, the Maria, who is being charged here, along with a writer, and the institution, the writer will post bail. And they'll have 15 days to do that. So they're going to take probably the maximum amount of time to study the details of the decision and also to post bail. Now, what does this mean for all of us? This is going to be, and I say all of us, the country, no? This is a cyber libel case that now means that anyone who posts something online will be liable for being sued for defamation or any kind of malice. On a broader scale, this also means that there is huge implications for media freedoms and press freedoms. This is the 11th case that was been filed against Maria, which has been ranging from cyber libel, tax evasion, and foreign ownership. Some of those cases have been resolved already. Some are still ongoing. So this is clearly, just by looking at the number of cases that have been brought against Maria and Rappler, this is clearly a case of intimidation and trying to silence the reportage of Rappler, which has been very critical of the Duterte government and of its brutal and notoriously violent drug war.
These are live pictures that we're getting right now. I believe Anna might be heading to a press conference, but not Anna, actually, Ms. Ressa. Anna, let me ask you, Ressa says she's trying to be mentally prepared so that, I mean, whatever happens, nothing will be a surprise. And the National Union of Journalists of the Philippines, the NUJP, said the government should, quote, stop weaponizing the law against journalists. Is that what's taking place here?
Very clearly, it is what's taking place here. The law is being used to silence critical reporting. Why do you say that? This particular case of cyber libel was applied to a story written by the writer of Rappler and filed against Maria after the story had been published a few months back. So the law was applied retroactively. The cyber libel law that Maria is charged with was applied retroactively. So that's a very clear case of how the law is being weaponized against journalists. If you see behind me, people are getting ready for the press conference. Maria should be coming out soon, and along with her lawyers.
We can see Maria Ressa right now speaking with some, I believe, with her lawyers. Anna, talk about what the implications are for press freedom after this case.
The Duterte government has clearly established a track record for silencing dissent. So we talked about the number of cases that have been brought against Rappler, the institution, and against Maria. But there are also a number of cases that have been brought against other media institutions in the Philippines. Most recently, ABS-CBN, which is the largest broadcaster in the Philippines, was shut down again on a technicality that they did not get to renew their franchise. That's the biggest television broadcaster in the country. A while back, there was also the cases brought against the owners of the Philippine Daily Inquirer, which is the largest national broadsheet in the country. Now, what do all of these three entities, Rappler, Philippine Daily Inquirer, and the ABS-CBN, have in common? They were all extremely critical of the Duterte government's drug war and exposed a lot of the police anomalies and extrajudicial killings. And we believe that's why there was a weaponization of the law against these media outlets.
Anna, in case you're now looking on to Satiati Wolf, a Philippine court has found news website chief Maria Ressa guilty of cyber libel. We're waiting right now to hear from Maria Ressa herself. She's likely, or expected rather, to go speak in front of a media audience. Anna, talk about the support that Maria has been getting from the media fraternity there. Do you think she's likely to appeal this?
First, the easier question. She is going to appeal this. I think that's something that was very clear on the part of the lawyer's briefing to the press yesterday. So that's the shorter answer. But on the question of support that she has been getting, Maria has gotten immense support from the international community. She was named Person of the Year by Time magazine, precisely because of how she has been standing up to this government and its continued attack on her as a person and also on media freedoms. Among the journalist circle and the media circle in the Philippines, she has also received wide support. But where does it get complicated? It gets complicated when it comes to public sentiment. There are a number of people. You have to remember, President Duterte is still a very popular president. He was democratically elected, and he continues to enjoy the support of the public. So that's where it's now, there you see the tension. The public sentiment on social media, whether it's troll-driven or organic, shows that some people have already been saying since the last couple of days, Maria Ressa deserves to be convicted, and then calling her all sorts of vile names, and also, calling for all sorts of other punishments other than this conviction. So locally, it's very fragmented. It's very torn apart in terms of the support she's getting.
We understand that Ms. Maria Ressa could face up to 12 years in prison. Anna, can you talk about RAPPLER, her media organization, RAPPLER's history with reporting on issues concerning the government?
So RAPPLER started out as completely an online outlet a few years ago. It was like the new kid on the block that, put together all these news articles online and utilized social media to not just push these articles, but also to gather civic engagement for certain causes. Now, the reportage that caught the ire of the president was one, the coverage of the drug war, and then secondly, also a piece written by Maria a few years back about how social media was being weaponized as well, in terms of disinformation and troll armies, and how the administration was using that. So that was a trigger on the president. The president, after that report about troll armies and deliberate disinformation by the administration, cited RAPPLER specifically at his State of the Nation address and said, "I'm going to get you, RAPPLER." Okay? He alleged that RAPPLER was foreign-owned, which is not. He also alleged that it was being run by the CIA. And a few days before that, after that announcement from the president, he said that there was already a charge against RAPPLER by the Securities and Exchange Commission.
Right, we're just looking at live pictures coming out from Manila in the Philippines, where Maria Ressa, who is a foreign correspondent and Filipino journalist, has just been convicted of libel charges. She could face up to 12 years in prison, and we're just waiting to see whether or not she gives a press conference. Her organization, RAPPLER, has reported extensively on the Filipino government, which is led by Mr. Duterte, President Duterte, who has actually come out quite strongly against RAPPLER and says that the media coverage on his government has been unfair. We will try to get Ana Santos back for us a bit later on. As I said, we are waiting on Ms. Ressa to give a statement to the media. If you're not looking on, the Philippine president, Mr. Rodrigo Duterte, has been accused, obviously, of targeting members of the media for what he calls unfavorable coverage. This high-profile journalist, Maria Ressa, she is still in court. She's just left after being read her conviction charges on libel. And this, according to many people, is a case that could affect the future of journalism and press freedom in the Philippines. It's quite an important case, and Ana Maria rather, said she had been quite scared, although quite determined to face this jury. She said she's quite scared for her future and what it means for the industry in Philippines. The president has been accused of many things in the past, including infringing on press freedom, unjust arrests of persons. He's quite known for his hard stance on certain criminal activity. He's lashed on quite hard on drug traffickers, etc., even people with minor charges. I believe we have Anna back with us right now. Anna, tell us what's happening where you are.
Right now, I'm standing in front of the courtroom. It's a little, it's a little chaotic here, and pandemonium broke out. We're waiting for Maria to give a statement right now. She's behind us. She's with her lawyer, Attorney Ted Te, and they're preparing to give a statement. And we hope the details of the conviction. So the conviction could mean paying a fine, because if the court did make it a bailable offense, she will post bail, and they will most likely appeal this case.
All right, and we know from a former interview that Maria said that before the ruling that, quote, we are at a precipice between a democracy and a dictatorship. Anna, what do you think she means by that?
This is really like, I can tell you that the atmosphere of the Philippines when it comes to democratic reporting, even for citizens, it's like you're already functioning under an authoritarianship without an overt or direct declaration of some kind of martial law or dictatorship. And you see this by the very ways that the government is trying to apply or pass certain laws that are meant to silence dissent or any kind of critical opinions of the administration. This conviction of Maria on cyber libel is just one example. But also, the government is working to pass new legislation on anti-terrorism, which allows the government to just about tag anyone who says anything critical about the government as a possible terrorist. So this is what she means when she's saying that there's a very, very thin line that we are crossing or walking between democracy and this kind of dictatorship, brutal dictatorship.
All right, and I'm just reading here, Anna, that the Human Rights Watch in the Philippines said the case against RAPPLER and Maria Ressa should never have been filed to begin with. The head of the organization, Carlos Conde, said, quote, the absurdity of this particular case against Maria Ressa. Prosecutors deemed the story in question republished after RAPPLER corrected one word that was misspelled, suggests the desperation of those behind it to silence her. And RAPPLER, and as we listen in here, I believe her lawyers are speaking.
Yes, correct.
On our motion, with no objection from the prosecution, the court allowed Maria and Ray to remain free on bail using the same bail that they previously posted. So obviously, we have yet to study the decision in its entirety. Kakahawak lang namin na decision. We have not yet studied, analyzed, discussed the decision. So we will still have to meet with, I will still have to meet with Maria and Ray to discuss legal steps forward. So obviously, legal steps forward would include questioning the decision and the appropriate proceeding, whether a motion for reconsideration or an appeal. So, but as of this moment, we still have yet to make that decision. We will still have to meet. We'll have to go over the decision carefully, talk about it, discuss its implications, and then we will make that decision. We have 15 days from today to make that decision. So within 15 days, we will probably update you on what we will be doing. Okay, so I'll turn you over to Maria and Ray for reactions. Ray, want to say something?
Am I breaking the law? Am I breaking breaking the law if I take my mask off? Mask on. Sabi mask on. Okay.
We're not even physically distant.
Okay, because I can say everybody move away. I think, taken alone, I think the decision for me is devastating because it essentially says that that we are wrong. I think you can look at the body of evidence that is there and see, taken in the context of everything that has happened to us, the fact that the case, I now still face 7 criminal charges. It's not unexpected, and at the same time, again, I feel like we will keep fighting. I think this is a blow. It's a blow to us, but it's also not unexpected considering that we are going to stand up against any kinds of attacks against press freedom. This is the first. It's followed by a whole slew of other cases of tax evasion, and then a whole slew that is based on foreign ownership and securities fraud. I really love that I became a criminal all in 1 year, several times. Having said that, I appeal to you, the journalists in this room, the Filipinos who are listening, to protect your rights. We are meant to be a cautionary tale. We are meant to make you afraid, right? So I appeal again. Don't be afraid, because if you don't use your rights, you will lose them. If we don't challenge a brazen move to try to roll back the rights guaranteed in the Constitution, we will lose them. We shouldn't be voluntarily giving up our rights. We will take this, well, as Ted just said, we haven't really talked about it, right? But, we will fight. So, sa mga Pilipino nanonood po, hindi lang po to tungkol sa RAPPLER. Hindi lang po to tungkol sa amin. Tungkol po to sa inyo. Because freedom of the press is the foundation of every single right you have as a Filipino citizen. Pag wala pong katotohanan, pag hindi po namin mapigil ang mga somebody give me the word, power. If we can't hold power to account, we can't do anything. Pag hindi po namin makakayaning if we can't do our jobs, then your rights will be lost. So sana po, tingnan po natin ang mga nangyayari sa kapaligiran natin ngayon, no? Ito pong mga restrictions. COVID-19, tama po yun. Dapat naman po tayo nag-physical distancing. Yung shutdown po ng ABS-CBN, that would have been unthinkable before this time. It has happened. And then an anti-terror bill that will take away, codify, institutionalize these abuses of power. It means that you can be called a terrorist, and without a warrant of arrest, you can be arrested for writing something. Any perceived critic, that you can be kept in jail for up to 24 days. Tingnan naman po natin ang lahat ng nangyayari sa ating bayan ngayon.
Okay. Sure? If you have questions, I'll use this. Okay. But if you have questions, does anyone have questions? No questions from the media? We're too tired. We're too tired. If you no longer have questions, no more ambush interview later, huh? So if you have questions, please ask them now.
Discussion
All right, flanked by a hands off the press sign. This is Filipino journalist Maria Ressa, who's just been convicted of libel, which she says she will appeal. She's in good spirits right now, making a joke about saying how she became a criminal in 1 year. We'll have more on this story for you in the next hour. Stick with us here on TRT World. Roundtable's next.
Welcome to BBC News. I'm Aaron Safir. Our top stories. The prominent journalist Maria Ressa has been convicted of libel in the Philippines. We'll have the latest from Manila. Hello and welcome. Within the past hour, a court in the Philippines has convicted the prominent journalist Maria Ressa of libel. She and a former writer with her news website RAPPLER were found guilty by the court in Manila. Both now face up to 6 years in jail, though they have been released on bail pending an appeal. The case has been seen as a test of freedom of the press in the Philippines. Maria Ressa, along with human rights campaigners, say she's been targeted because of her website's criticism of the country's president, Rodrigo Duterte. Well, for more, I'm joined by our correspondent in Manila, Howard Johnson. Manila, she was speaking just before she went into court. You spoke with her briefly. We've also heard from Maria Ressa after the verdict. What she had to say.
Well, she said that today's verdict will affect the quality of democracy, not just here in the Philippines, but around the world. This is a serious attack on the freedom of the media, according to her. This means that anyone posting online from this day onwards has the chance of becoming criminalized for their behavior. This all dates back to 2012 when this article was written. That was 8 years ago. But in 2014, it was changed by RAPPLER. They said allegedly just changing a typo. But because of that, it meant that the cyber libel law that was passed some 4 months after the original article was written meant that came into play. And what we saw in 2017 and 2018 was this progress to the courtroom here. We've been following it for the last 8 months. Wilfredo Keng is the complainant. He said that the article besmirched his name, it defamed him in the eyes of the public, and he wanted to set the record straight through this court case. The judge today said that RAPPLER didn't provide the evidence to verify the claims against him, saying that he was involved in drug smuggling and human trafficking, allegations he always denied. They said today, the judge, that you can't use the freedom of the press as a shield against these allegations made by Wilfredo Keng. And today we found that Maria Ressa and a writer from the website have been found guilty and, as you say, could face up to 6 years in jail.
Do we think they're actually going to go to jail? I mean, they're going to appeal. How long could all this take then?
Well, justice in the Philippines is normally sluggish, but this case was interesting because it moved very quickly. We've seen another prominent critic of President Rodrigo Duterte, Senator Leila de Lima, languishing in jail for years, for 3 years now, waiting for her day in court. But this one was turned around relatively quickly. And lots of people in this country say we've got to look at the bigger picture here. There were 11 cases filed against RAPPLER in the last few years. They were for tax evasion, they were for allegations of foreign ownership violations, and of course this one about cyber libel. So those critics of the president say that this was a result of a concerted effort by the president, who has called RAPPLER a fake news outlet. He even complained to one of their reporters that he would send them to jail without bail, something we're not seeing here today. They are getting the chance to go and ask for bail, but what we have seen here is the government also saying they're just applying the letter of the law, that if a person, a private businessman, had his name degraded by an article, then he has the right to go to court and to protest that.
Howard Johnson joining us from Manila. Thanks for bringing us up to date. Let's stay with this story. Speak to Steve Butler. He's the Asia program lead for the Committee to Protect Journalists. He's joining me right now from Washington. Thanks for joining us at such short notice. Can we just get your reaction initially to this verdict?
Well, I'm horrified by it. It's a complete miscarriage of justice. If you look at all of the cases that your correspondent just outlined, it's clear that there's a campaign against Maria Ressa and RAPPLER, and has very grave implications for press freedom in the Philippines. Every journalist now is under threat because of what is taking place.
Howard also mentioned the cyber libel law under which this case was prosecuted. What can you tell us about that law and the way in which it was applied in this case?
Well, initially, the government decided that the law didn't apply because of the timing of the law, and but it's true. In 2014, they changed one letter in a typo, and then this was considered to be a republishing of the article, which is a bit of a stretch, to be honest. They look at every turn. They've really twisted the law to create a climate for conviction.
And I just want to get a sense, Steve, of the wider context here, because of course this isn't the first lawsuit against RAPPLER, and this isn't the first case of the Philippines government sort of going after media outlets. We've also seen a major TV news outlet essentially come off the air.
Yes, that's right. I mean, the president in December said that he was determined to get ABS-CBN network off the air, and although he claims he wasn't responsible for it actually happening, it did indeed come to pass because the license was not renewed by the Congress, and the administrative authorities decided to force it off the air. This is by far the largest and most successful TV news network upon which many Filipinos depend for the news. In the middle of a pandemic, it's even more horrifying, frankly, that this could be shut off.
And how do you assess the role of Rodrigo Duterte, the president of the Philippines, in these cases? How involved and how engaged in these is he? How much does he play an interest?
Well, he says that he has been hands-off on these cases, that he has not been directly involved. But it's very hard to take that very seriously, that he has an administration that reports to him, and these are the people who are carrying this out. He has been gunning for RAPPLER and Maria Ressa for quite a long time. It's not just her, it's other people on the staff that he's gone after. So it's not very credible.
Steve Butler from the Committee to Protect Journalists, thanks very much for your time.
My pleasure, thank you.
Now on to other news. A court in the Philippines has convicted the prominent journalist Maria Ressa of libel. She and a former writer with her news website RAPPLER were found guilty by the court in Manila. Both now face up to 6 years in jail, though they've been released on bail pending appeal. The case has been seen as a test of freedom of the press in the Philippines. Maria Ressa, along with human rights campaigners, say she's been targeted because of her website's criticism of the country's President Rodrigo Duterte. Well, let's talk to Howard Johnson about this, our correspondent based in Manila. Howard, tell us more about this case.
Yeah, this case all dates back to 2012, May 2012, where this article was first published against this businessman, Wilfredo Keng. It alleged that he was involved in drug smuggling and human trafficking, citing an intelligence report, something Wilfredo Keng has always denied. Now, what happened today is some 8 years after this article has been published, we have seen that the verdict has been delivered that RAPPLER were guilty of cyber libel for not providing the evidence that they cited in that report of that Mr. Keng was involved in these shady practices, as they put it in the article. The judge said that this had nothing to do with the government, because RAPPLER have always been saying that this is a part of a campaign by the government. 11 cases filed against them in 2018, including tax evasion and foreign ownership violations. They saw that as a wider concerted effort to try to bring them down. The government have always said that this is just a private case by a businessman who believed his name had been dragged through the mud in the public. Today we have seen that the two defendants have been found guilty. They have posted bail, and they will have to pay Mr. Wilfredo Keng around $8,000 in damages.
And this is really being seen, isn't it, by journalists in the country as a test case?
Yeah, I mean, what we're seeing today is that if you are going to publish something online in the Philippines, you might be criminally charged for it. You might be spending time in jail, up to 6 years for Maria Ressa, at best 6 months. And what we're seeing is people here in this country saying, human rights defenders and journalists saying that they've been repeatedly attacked since President Rodrigo Duterte came to power online. There's a nasty online troll culture in this country, not unique to this country, but particularly fierce, where death threats are banded around if you write articles that are not received well by supporters of the government. Not much has been done to tackle that issue over the last few years, and what we're seeing is that the government have always said, no, we're absolutely into freedom of speech. That's why they allow people like the BBC to report from the country. They say that they're all for freedom of speech, but you must play by the rules of the law. If you write an article that hasn't been properly verified, then you will suffer the consequences.
OK, thank you. Howard Johnson in Manila for us. Well, we also spoke to Glenda Gloria, managing editor of RAPPLER, about what this decision does mean for Maria Ressa, the publication, and freedom of the press in the Philippines.
It is a sad day for all of us here at RAPPLER, but also, I guess, for the nation. It's been 4 years, after all, of a lot of attacks against journalists and activists in the Philippines. But what we'd like to say is that we will continue to hold the line. This is not a death blow to the kind of journalism that RAPPLER has been known for. We will continue to shine a light on the critical issues in our country. It has not weakened our resolve to expose wrongdoing in government, to continue writing about the violent drug war in the Philippines and about how this government has been bungling its measures against the coronavirus pandemic. Thankfully, this is a bailable offense, and the judge upheld the original bail that we already posted on behalf of Maria and Ray. We will huddle with the lawyers, and the next step, although the logical step would be to file a case with the Court of Appeals to appeal the decision, but that's something that we will have to consult our lawyers on.
You're with BBC World News. I'm Sally Bundock with the latest headlines. Philippine journalist Marisa Ressa talks to us about her libel conviction, which human rights campaigners say is a threat to democracy. A warm welcome to the programme. A court in the Philippines has convicted the prominent journalist Maria Ressa of libel. She and a former writer with her news website RAPPLER were found guilty by a court in Manila today. Both now face up to 6 years in jail, though they have been released on bail pending an appeal. Well, Maria Ressa herself is able to talk to us from her home, having been released on bail. Maria, first of all, your reaction to the conviction. Is this the outcome you expected?
I think the pattern was very clear. We've been under attack for 4 years by this government, weaponization of social media, and those same messages then coming out of President Duterte, and then a slew of legal cases. In about a year, in 2018, we had 11 cases and investigations. I have 8 criminal charges. I've been arrested and detained. I've gone through the ringer on this. So yes, I'm convicted today, but I also think that I'm not the only one. RAPPLER and I weren't the only ones on trial. I think what you're seeing is death by 1,000 cuts, not just of press freedom, but of democracy. Our justice system was on trial today, and it just joined the kind of messaging that was pushed out on social media in 2016. Journalist equals criminal. The justice system just took a little bit longer to catch up, and here we go.
Well, we'll talk about the wider issues in a moment, but if we just focus on this case, Maria, I mean, the court says it's not politically motivated. It's a straightforward libel case, and you were found to be on the wrong side of the law. Your response to that?
there's lots of legal acrobatics to even get this case to court, considering that the piece we're talking about was published before the crime we allegedly committed had even been enacted into law. I mean, essentially, what they did was to say that when Rappler changed the typographical error, that we republished an article. That's a novel theory for online media, that by just changing an article, you republished it. And then there's something else that affects every Filipino with this decision. They're essentially saying that the period of prescription, the statute of limitations for the crime of libel, has shifted from 1 year to 12 years. I mean, there's so many problematic instances in this decision. It is certainly a press freedom issue. It is certainly also, it needs to be seen in the context of the Philippines today. Not just the repeated attacks against Rappler and on me, but also the shutdown of the largest broadcaster in the Philippines, ABS-CBN, just last May.
Now, you're at home, you're able to talk to us currently. There's an appeal process happening. How long will that take, and how hopeful are you that you might win the appeal?
Well, that's a tough question, because it's like watching a slow train wreck in motion and then standing there until the train hits you, you know. If I just look based on actions, Rappler and I are very foolish. But at the same time, the reason why we have to stand still and have it come crash down on us is precisely because so much is at stake, not just for journalists, but for Filipinos, for democracy, and globally. This is, I think we're fighting the same battles that journalists all around the world are facing against populist authoritarian leaders that are hitting the messengers instead of dealing with the kind of checks and balances that we fulfill. The mission of journalism is extremely important. If we buckle, we would lose it.
If you lose the appeal, though, and if they want to send a message, you could be looking at 6-7 years in prison. I mean, how do you feel about that? Obviously, you weighed this up beforehand.
Yeah, absolutely. The attacks began in 2016, so we've been dealing with this. Look, Amal Clooney is the head of our international legal team, with Keelan Gallagher, who also is the chief, one of the lead counsels for the Daphne Caruana Galizia family. This is obviously a press freedom issue. I have been a journalist coming up on 35 years next year, and when Amal told me, every time she writes me an email, the first time, you know, she wrote me an email when she was going over how many years I could spend in prison. All of the 8 charges combined at one point is almost cumulatively 100 years in jail. There's a clause where I could probably only spend 40 years, but, you know, if I get lost in that detail, then we can't do our jobs. And the biggest problem right now is that you have to battle fear. We have to embrace our fear because we need to hold power to account. I have firsthand knowledge of the abuse of power, of the violation of my rights, and I will speak up.
Well, you absolutely are. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But in terms of your preparation for being in prison in the Philippines, I mean, for those of us watching around the world, I'm sitting in London. I've got no idea. What would that be like for you?
It would be horrendous. But, you know, I gave the commencement speech to Princeton's class of 2020. And one of the 3 things I told them is something that advice I was taking myself because I was preparing for the slew of cases and the verdict. Look, last year, there were weeks I was in 4 different courtrooms. I was spending 90% of my time on these legal cases. One of the things I told them is embrace your fear. And I started doing that once it came on, the pylon happened, and I began to, you know, really touch it and then hold it and imagine it in my head so that I could rob it of its sting. Sure, I don't want to go to jail, but I'm not going to buckle. The only way to deal with a bully is to stand up and say they're wrong. And in this case, we don't want to voluntarily give up our rights. We shouldn't, and we stand for the Filipino people.
I mean, you have been subject to so much abuse online, you know, in the public arena as well. I mean, clearly you are such a bold, confident person and able to handle that. But what impact has all this had on you?
I've had to learn anger management really well, but this is something our jobs have taught us, right? You push your anger low and you push your emotion aside so you can think clearly and make the right decisions. What I've learned here is that this is a pivotal moment for my country, to the journalists working here. And we see what we're going through replicated in other democracies around the world, because part of what's given governments like mine greater power is the propaganda machine on social media. A lie laced with anger and hate spreads fastest on social media and told 1 million times becomes a fact. So, this narrative that they spread as early as 2016, that Maria Ressa is not a journalist, she's a criminal. Well, here we go, 2020, I'm convicted. So not a surprise, but I'm just extremely sad for my nation.
Well, Maria, it's been really excellent to talk to you, and thank you for making the time. And we shall keep a very, very close eye and report on your case, of course, here at BBC World News. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello and welcome if you're watching here in the UK or around the globe. I'm Aaron Safir. Our top stories. The prominent journalist Maria Ressa has been convicted of libel in the Philippines. Campaigners say the trial was aimed at silencing critics of President Rodrigo Duterte. Hello and welcome. A court in the Philippines has convicted the prominent journalist Maria Ressa of libel. She and a former writer with her news website RAPPLER were found guilty by the court in Manila. Both now face up to 6 years in jail, though they have been released on bail pending an appeal. The case has been seen as a test of press freedom in the Philippines. Maria Ressa, along with human rights campaigners, say she's been targeted because of her website's criticism of the country's president, Rodrigo Duterte. Our correspondent in Manila, Howard Johnson, spoke to Maria Ressa a short time ago. So Howard Johnson in the Philippines. We're joined now by Ramona Diaz. She's a Filipino-American filmmaker and director of 1,000 Cuts, a documentary following Maria Ressa, RAPPLER, and its conflicts with the government of President Duterte. Thanks very much for joining us. I just want to get your reaction to this conviction, first of all, please.
Shocking. I mean, I thought it would happen. I thought that she'd be found guilty because from everything that's been happening, the political realities in the Philippines right now, from the shutting down of the biggest broadcasting company in the Philippines in the middle of a pandemic, from the passing of an anti-terror bill that is widespread. The definition of terrorism is broad, so dissent can be considered terrorism. So in light of that, in that context, I had a feeling it might be a guilty verdict, but it's still a shock. It's still a shock because she actually did not write that article. She didn't write an article, and what they're saying is actually like they're applying the law retroactively, right? Because they changed the article, just a typo, but according to the law, it was republished, and because it was republished, it was within after the law had already been implemented. But that's not true.
Forgive me for interrupting. You spent a long time working with her. You've come to know her body of work. What motivates her? Why does she do what she does?
She's a journalist at heart. And for her, it is really, journalism is like the heart of a democracy, right? Without journalism, democracy erodes. So I think that's what motivates her. It's really speaking truth to power. I know that's a cliche, it's been used a lot, but she truly believes in that. And the heart, and so that's what motivates her, to do good journalism, to look at power, ask questions, ask the right questions, because that, for her, is really the soul of a democracy, a free press.
And pursuing that work has brought some difficulty upon her over the years. I believe you were with her on an occasion when she was arrested.
We were with her on both arrests, yes. So that's so 1,000 Cuts is really a very immersive film spent with Maria Ressa. From the time she was arrested twice to the end of the midterm elections last year, and when she got to be Time 100. She was chosen as a part of the Time 100 last year.
I understand the documentary when you started making the documentary, it was focused on the war on drugs in the Philippines, but the more time you spent with Maria Ressa, that changed. What was it about her that sort of inspired you to change and to change the topic of that documentary?
But yeah, at first I was interested in the drug war, but when I live in the U.S. and by the time I got to the Philippines and started really researching the film and met Maria, I realized that it was only Maria who was connecting the drug war, disinformation, and impunity, right? She was questioning the drug war, and she was questioning the numbers, how many people were dying. And for that, she got really pounded by the administration. But she connected that to disinformation and what online, right? Because after she questioned the numbers, she was pounded and she got like 98 messages an hour online. And she, the hashtag Arrest Maria Ressa started trending, but it didn't trend enough. So she was only arrested 3 years later, but that was the aim, right? So she was looking at behavior online, the drug war, and impunity, and she was the only one really doing that. And I thought that was a more, really a more global story, a more, not that the drug war isn't relevant, but it just gave it a broader view, put it in context globally, actually. You
mentioned some of the abuse that she's received on social media. How much of that do you feel has been encouraged, fomented by the government in the Philippines, led by President Duterte?
I think a lot of it. I mean, there are so many trolls after her that are that are encouraged by the government, right? One of the main person who is actually called the Queen of Fake News, works for the government, Mocha Uson. She has a website, the blog, that has really attacked Maria Ressa. And this is someone who works for the government. So it's really a direct correlation or a direct relation with the government.
Maria Ressa has said she's going to appeal. What's that process going to look like, and how likely do you think it is that she'll be successful?
I don't really know the appeal process, so I'm not sure I can answer that. But yeah, she will appeal. I don't know how long it's going to take, but like your reporter said, Howard Johnson said, this has been fast-tracked, right? This is usually cyber libel cases in the Philippines last for years, like 7-8 years. This was like months, less than a year, and there's already a verdict. So I'm sure, and they want to fast-track it because she has 8 other cases. This is not the only case she has in the Philippines. She has 8 other cases ongoing as well. And this has been the fastest, right? So I probably I'm not sure. I'm not one to speak to how the legalities of that will go.
Sure. Listen, before we let you go, I just want to ask you what your message would be to to Maria and to other journalists in the Philippines right now.
Journalism is more important than ever, right, worldwide, because of the rise of authoritarianism. We need independent media more than ever. So I know Maria's strong. She's still so, I saw her at her press briefing right after the verdict, and she was still so clear on her mission, right? So Maria, keep strong, keep doing what you're doing, right? You're doing your job. You got convicted for doing your job as a journalist, but that's what you do. You have to keep doing your job. You have to keep shining the light.
Romena Diaz, thanks very much for your time. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
Turning to other news, and high-profile Filipino journalist Maria Ressa has been found guilty of cyber libel by a court in Manila. She's been sentenced to at least 6 months in prison and up to 6 years in jail. Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte has been accused of targeting members of the media for unfavorable coverage. Ressa says her case is one that affects every Filipino.
I think the decision for me is devastating because it essentially says that RAPPLER, that we are wrong. I think that's you can look at the body of evidence that is there and see, taken in the context of everything that has happened to us, the fact that the case, I now still face 7 criminal charges. It's not unexpected, and at the same time, again, I feel like we will keep fighting. I think this is a blow. It's a blow to us, but it's also not unexpected considering that we are going to stand up against any kind of attacks against press freedom.
Right, from on this, Ana Santos joins us from Manila. As we saw there, Ana, Maria Ressa addressing the media. What more did she say?
At first, Maria was very defiant, very hopeful, exactly what she said, that we will continue fighting. And then she turned very emotional at one point when she made a call out to the Filipino people to say that this case was more than just being about Rappler and more than just being an infringement on press freedom. She made a plea to all Filipinos to stand up for their rights, because press freedom is the very basis of all of their rights, and as the press being the watchdog or holding power to account, will not be able to do that in the service of the public under this continuous harassment. She made that plea also to the Filipino people. And just to explain that a little bit more, why did she say that this was more than just a case of attacking free press? There's been a number of cases brought against Maria. She mentioned that this is like there's been a total of 10 or 11 cases brought upon her. She said that she joked that she had never been labeled more times a criminal in 1 year than this past year that she's been attacked by all of these cases. But what she's showing there is that apart from Rappler being attacked with these cases, meant to silence dissent and intimidate them, and also to bog down on the reportage. Can you imagine the amount of time it takes for Maria and the team to be here, to appear in court, and how it is also drying up the resources of Rappler? That's one way of looking at the way that the government is also tightening the screw on Rappler's continuous critical reporting of the government. Aside from this, the government has also shut down the largest broadcaster in the Philippines, which is ABS-CBN, and has also filed similar charges of tax evasion against the owners of Philippine Daily Inquirer, which is the largest national broadsheet in the country. So when you look at all of that, that's clearly a case of how the government is silencing any kind of unfavorable reporting of its policies. And wider than that, there's also additional laws that the government is trying to pass that will affect every Filipino. Most recent of this is the anti-terror law, which will allow the government to tag anyone who posts anything that is not favorable to the government or seen as a critique of the government as a terrorist. And it will allow warrantless arrests and prolonged detention. Taking all of this is why this case is more than just a press freedom case.
Ana, the National Union of Journalists of the Philippines said the government should, quote, stop weaponizing the law against the media. Is that what's happened to Ressa?
Absolutely. You know, the law here that was cited is cyber libel. So Maria was charged for violating that law. Now let's look at that a little bit. Let's break that down. The article in question that was allegedly, libelous was published before the law was passed. In effect, the law was applied to Maria Ressa and to Rappler and to the writer retroactively. That in itself is very alarming, right? You apply a law retroactively. Number two, how were they able to do that? How were they able to find some kind of loophole to apply this law? The article in question was updated because there was a typo error in the article. So the complainant said that on the basis of this, adjusting a typographical error, the article was republished at a later time, and this cyber libel law was then applied. And again, there are other examples, like the shutdown of ABS-CBN, the largest broadcaster. That was also shut. The law that was cited to shut that down was also a technicality. they weren't allowed to renew their franchise. And a franchise of a broadcaster is approved by, guess who? The Congress. So it's all of these little ways that the law is being used to and weaponized against journalists and critical or dissenters.
But Anna Santos and Manila, great reporting there. Thanks for that, Anna. We appreciate it. And high-profile Filipino journalist Maria Ressa has been found guilty of cyber libel by a court in Manila. She faces up to 6 years in jail, but was not immediately taken into custody as her lawyer says they will appeal the verdict. Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte has been accused of targeting members of the media for unfavorable coverage. Ressa says her case is one that affects every Filipino.
I think the decision for me is devastating because it essentially says that RAPPLER, that we are wrong. I think that's, you can look at the body of evidence that is there and see, taken in the context of everything that has happened to us, the fact that the case, I now still face 7 criminal charges. It's not unexpected. And at the same time, again, I feel like we will keep fighting. I think this is a blow. It's a blow to us, but it's also not unexpected considering that we are going to stand up against any kind of attacks against press freedom.
Anna Santos is a Manila and says this case is more than just a press freedom case.
At first, Maria was very defiant, very hopeful, exactly what she said, that we will continue fighting. And then she turned very emotional at one point when she made a call out to the Filipino people to say that this case was more than just being about RAPPLER and more than just being an infringement on press freedom. She made a plea to all Filipinos to stand up for their rights because press freedom is the very basis of all of their rights, and as the press being the watchdog or holding power to account, will not be able to do that in the service of the public under this continuous harassment. She made that plea also to the Filipino people. And just to explain that a little bit more, why did she say that this was more than just a case of attacking free press? There's been a number of cases brought against Maria. She mentioned that there's been a total of 10 or 11 cases brought upon her. She said that she joked that she had never been labeled more times a criminal in 1 year than this past year that she's been attacked by all of these cases. But what she's showing there is that apart from RAPPLER being attacked with these cases, meant to silence dissent and intimidate them, and also to bog down on the reportage. Can you imagine the amount of time it takes for Maria and the team to be here, to appear in court, and how it is also drying up the resources of RAPPLER. That's one way of looking at the way that the government is also tightening the screw on RAPPLER's continuous critical reporting of the government.
High-profile Filipino journalist Maria Ressa has been found guilty of cyber libel by a court in Manila. She faces up to 6 years in jail, but was not immediately taken into custody, as her lawyer says they will appeal the verdict. Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte has been accused of targeting members of the media for unfavorable coverage. Ressa says her case is one that affects every Filipino.
We will keep fighting. I think this is a blow. It's a blow to us, but it's also not unexpected considering that we are going to stand up against any kind of attacks against press freedom.
Stay with TRT World. The news continues right after Showcase. High-profile Filipino journalist Maria Ressa has been found guilty of cyber libel by a court in Manila. She faces up to 6 years in prison. Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte has been accused of targeting members of the media for unfavorable coverage. Ressa says her case is one that affects every Filipino.
I think the decision for me is devastating because it essentially says that RAPPLER, that we are wrong. I think you can look at the body of evidence that is there and see, taken in the context of everything that has happened to us, the fact that the case, I now still face 7 criminal charges. It's not unexpected, and at the same time, again, I feel like we will keep fighting. I think this is a blow. It's a blow to us, but it's also not unexpected considering that we are going to stand up against any kind of attacks against press freedom.
Ana Santos is in Manila and says this case is more than just about press freedom.
At first, Maria was very defiant, very hopeful, exactly what she said, that we will continue fighting. And then she turned very emotional at one point when she made a call out to the Filipino people to say that this case was more than just being about RAPPLER and more than just being an infringement on press freedom. She made a plea to all Filipinos to stand up for their rights because press freedom is the very basis of all of their rights. And as the press being the watchdog or holding power to account, will not be able to do that in the service of the public under this continuous harassment. She made that plea also to the Filipino people. And just to explain that a little bit more, why did she say that this is more than just a case of attacking free press? There's been a number of cases brought against Maria. She mentioned that there's been a total of 10 or 11 cases brought upon her. She said that she joked that she had never been labeled more times a criminal in 1 year than this past year that she's been attacked by all of these cases. But what she's showing there is that apart from RAPPLER being attacked with these cases, meant to silence dissent and intimidate them, and also to bog down on the reportage. Can you imagine the amount of time it takes for Maria and the team to be here, to appear in court, and how it is also drying up the resources of RAPPLER. That's one way of looking at the way that the government is also tightening the screw on RAPPLER's continuous critical reporting of the government.
One of the Philippines' most prominent journalists and one of her colleagues have been found guilty of libel in a case seen as a major blow to press freedom. Maria Ressa denies the charges over an article on her news website, RAPPLER, linking a businessman to criminal activity. The site has reported on extrajudicial killings and abuses during President Rodrigo Duterte's time in office. She faces up to 6 years in prison and is expected to appeal the conviction. Now, the case is the first of at least 8 filed against Ressa since Duterte came to office in 2016. They include alleged tax evasion and foreign ownership that are banned in the Philippines. The cyber libel case stems from a 2017 complaint filed by a businessman over a RAPPLER story published in 2012 before the cybercrime law was passed. Alfredo King says he was defamed when he was linked to the then Supreme Court justice who was later removed from office for failing to declare assets. The libel complaint was dismissed in 2018, but government investigators later reversed that decision. Maria Ressa joins us live now from Manila. Maria, thank you very much for your time. I guess first your reaction to this.
Disbelief at first, but then again, I can't really say that because I had expected the book to be thrown at me. I had expected a conviction. I had expected worse conditions. It's a very strange time, and you go through an emotional roller coaster. By the time it hit me, we've crossed another boundary. In 2016, the government attacks on social media said that they would try to turn the journalist label to criminal. It took 4 years, and here we are. I've now been convicted. But of course, we will fight this in court.
What are the types of ways that, obviously, this is the most egregious way in which your job has become impossible to do, but along the way, what were the things that you were seeing that you can tell this was going in a bad direction?
I think the weaponization of social media was the first, and this was in 2016. We did one of the first stories around the world to look at how Facebook algorithms impact democracy. For the series that we called the propaganda war, I was attacked, and that kind of weaponization, the narratives that were there, that's where I became a criminal already, that then translated into the law. A year later, the same attacks came out of President Duterte's mouth, and then now it took a year, 4 years, but now the court has joined in this insidious attack on press freedom and the attempt to stifle the rights that are in the Constitution. The number of cases that have been filed in 2018, 11 cases against us. And then in 2019, the arrests and detention. And now 7 other criminal cases, So I guess I know what is coming. It's like looking at a train wreck happening in slow motion, but we're still standing. We're going to fight back. And while there's a veneer of rule of law, we're going to make sure that every signature, every name, Judge Montesa's court today made a decision that is now written down in stone. That's a new point.
When you say we are going to fight back, who are the allies of press freedom? Who are your allies in that country?
I actually think a lot more because, again, these attacks have been going on for a while, but just in 2020, 3 big things happened. A very militaristic pandemic lockdown. The second is just about a month ago on May 5th, President Duterte, the administration essentially shut down ABS-CBN, the largest broadcaster, the largest news group in this country. And then just last week, the House of Representatives passed an anti-terror bill that is essentially going to codify, institutionalize a lot of these abuses of power. And once the president turns this into law, you can be arrested without a warrant. If you are a government, if you're questioning the government, you could be named a terrorist. You could be held in prison for 24 days without a warrant. These are new things. And I think that's why I feel like we're crossing another milestone with this decision, because it is codifying into law 2 major processes. The legal acrobatics that happened to get this case to court is incredible. The first one is that they actually had to change the statute of limitations for libel from 1 year to 12 years. And then they introduced a novel concept of republication, continuous publication, because the law that we supposedly violated didn't exist when we published this story. When we corrected a typographical error 2 years later, that is the basis of bringing this case to court. So
Unreal.
We want to hold the government to account on these.
So answer me this. What effect, obviously what you're going through is the most extreme, but there's a spectrum of the type of effect that this has on other journalists. How do you think this is affecting other journalists? Are they scared to do their jobs?
I think that was at the beginning. It's 4 years in. And I think I'm hoping that that journalists will see, and I made this appeal when I talked to them, that we must do our jobs, because if we don't exercise that, those rights will be taken away from us. And I think this stands for, all the rights that are guaranteed in the Constitution, because it sits on the public's right to know. Freedom of speech, freedom of the press. I'm hoping we're waking up. I hate to be the one, we're the cautionary tale. The chilling effect happened years ago, and now there is enough of a track record, the shutting down of ABS-CBN being the one before me, and then here, a conviction for libel of a story I never had a hand in, and one of the things that was that made me both angry and made me laugh was there's a part in the judgment where the judge actually impugned malice by saying that my title, executive editor, is, and this is in her words, a clever ruse to evade responsibility. I had that title before this case was filed, and I'll keep it, so we're going to challenge this in court. Judge Montesa I think, she dealt a blow to press freedom, but it isn't over.
A clever title. Wow. Well, you are a very smart woman. You are very clever. Ms. Maria Ressa, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Plenty more ahead in the news hour.
Are we a democracy or not? Let us do our jobs.
A blow to press freedoms in the Philippines. 2 journalists are convicted for the first time in a libel case. I'm Kim Vidal. This is Al Jazeera Live from Doha. Also coming up, Turkey carries out airstrikes in northern Iraq against Kurdish fighters it calls terrorists. A video emerges showing a black man in the US being shot by police in Atlanta. The death sparks a new wave of protests. Words of hope, letters from family members and friends become a lifeline for coronavirus patients in Mexico. One of the Philippines' most prominent journalists has been found guilty of libel in a case seen as a major blow to press freedom. Maria Ressa denies the charges brought over an article published on her news website RAPPLER. It linked a wealthy businessman to criminal activity. Her online portal has highlighted extrajudicial killings and abuses during President Rodrigo Duterte's time in office. Ressa is expected to appeal against the conviction that carries a sentence of up to 6 years in prison.
I appeal to you, the journalists in this room, the Filipinos who are listening, to protect your rights. We are meant to be a cautionary tale. We are meant to make you afraid, right? So I appeal again. Don't be afraid, because if you don't use your rights, you will lose them. If we don't challenge a brazen move to try to roll back the rights guaranteed in the Constitution, we will lose them.
The case is the first of at least 8 filed against Teresa since Duterte came to office in 2016. These include alleged tax evasion and foreign ownership that are banned in the Philippines. The cyber libel case stems from a 2017 complaint filed by a businessman over a RAPPLER story published in 2012. That's before the cybercrime law was passed. Wilfredo King said he was defamed when he was linked to the then Supreme Court Chief Justice, who was later removed from office for failing to declare assets. The libel complaint was initially dismissed in 2018, but government investigators reversed their decision and recommended that Ressa be prosecuted. Jamila Andogan has more from outside the court in Manila.
This is not the first time, though, and not the only case that journalists are facing. As you know, just over a month ago, the biggest media network was shut down. ABS-CBN also was shut down because of its failure to renew its license. There was also another broadsheet that was also threatened to be closed. So no, the United Nations, all other rights organizations have called this, of course, a dark day in journalism. But this is not new. This has been going on for the last 4 years, although there is no official reaction again from the Philippine government at this point, from the Office of the President. You know, many actually believe that this has been the case simply because Duterte has basically waged a war against journalists by calling them fake news. For the previous statement he made a few years ago that some journalists do deserve to be killed. So right now at this point, Maria Ressa still is at her press conference. She's sharing her sentiments with other journalists. A lot of people say they will continue to support Maria. They think that this is the first time that basically cyber libel was weaponized. It was something that was passed during the previous administration, but a lot of rights groups over the past few years have actually been calling on the government to decriminalize libel. They worry, though, that the case of Maria, despite being prominent, actually has a greater impact to lesser-known community journalists who may not have the same gravitas, who will feel intimidated every time they write a story, every time they they speak truth to power, every time they face bigger challenges and go against powerful people.
Let's speak now to Barbara Trionfi in Vienna. She is the executive director of the International Press Institute, a journalism advocacy group where Maria Ressa is part of the executive board. Thank you for your time. Is this the final nail in the coffin for media freedom in the Philippines?
One of many. I think it certainly is a very negative sign. It sets a very problematic precedent for a country where President Duterte has tried in many ways to muzzle the press, has successfully also intimidated journalists into self-censorship. Most recently, additionally to all the attacks against Maria Ressa and RAPPLER, it also forced the shutdown of a television network. So it's a highly problematic verdict to what we're seeing here.
I just want to pick up on something you mentioned, self-censorship. You also mentioned ABS-CBN, which went off air.
Right.
There seemed to be no real fallout of that for Duterte. So are journalists now self-censoring? Has it been effective?
You know, self-censorship is something that is very difficult to measure, but it is inevitable that in a country where anybody who is speaking up against the government, not necessarily just doing journalistic work, basically exposing the immense corruption that this government is also affected, exposing the breaches of human rights that the Duterte administration has been committing. And anybody is facing the face that we are seeing now with Maria Ressa. So it's really inevitable that self-censorship is the outcome. And certainly we see that very much in the Philippines as well.
I was interested to hear Maria Ressa talk about how social media has been weaponized against her and how that is happening around the world against both news outlets and individual journalists. Is that what you're seeing?
Absolutely. Not only we have observed social media, the weaponization, the use of social media platforms by trolls, whatever you want to call them, page propagandists of the government, which also stimulate a reaction among supporters of the government. So there is an entire network of people who are heavily active on social media and extremely active in attacking journalists like Maria Ressa. Even at IPI, we have experienced this. Whenever we, as IPI, post any statement in defense of Maria on social media, we immediately, within a couple of hours, we received hundreds of very unpleasant comments directed at her. So it is incredible how much the social media platforms have left space at this propaganda machine, that's how I would call it, made of trolls, made of supporters, made of a complexity of individuals and bots that are active on social media to support the government.
Thank you for that, Barbara Triumphi from the International Press Institute. And actually, my colleague Rochelle Carey will be speaking to Maria Ressa herself. That's on the News Hour coming up at 10. Jamila Andogan joins us now live from Manila. So what happened in the court today?
Well, we saw Maria arrive. She said a bit of hello, how are you doing to the journalists who were waiting. And shortly after the conviction, she went straight to the press conference, and that was just shown earlier. It was met by, of course, outrage and sadness here, and a lot of organizations have actually described the conviction of Maria as another sad existential moment in Philippine press freedom history. But the bigger question here, though, is the kind of message it sends to lesser influential, lesser known community journalists who are continuing to do investigative work in different parts of the country. This is also not the first time and not the only network, RAPPLER, which she co-founded, which is currently embattled under this administration. ABS-CBN, Kim, the biggest TV media network in the country, was forcibly shut down over a month ago for its failure to renew its license after it was not given its license by Congress, which is now basically controlled by the president. Now, the spokesperson of President Rodrigo Duterte says today that basically Maria Ressa is barking up the wrong tree, that the president has nothing to do with the conviction today, and that he has never himself, the president, actually sued anyone for libel. But in the past, Kim, the president has called RAPPLER fake news. He has accused journalists of bias, and at some point Duterte himself said at a press conference facing journalists that some journalists actually deserve to be killed. So now it remains to be seen how this will pan out when she submits her petition to the Court of Appeals. Of course, she is out on bail today. She's still facing 7 other cases, and of course, the mother of all cases, the most difficult part, is the accusation that RAPPLER, the biggest online news network in the Philippines, is actually partially owned, which is actually not allowed in the Constitution. So in her appeal today, apart from what was shown earlier, she also appealed to social media platforms, in particular Facebook, to actually be more responsible in controlling the propaganda that is being used and waged against journalists since 2016. She says this is actually the most difficult part at this point. She was calm, she was collected, but again, the biggest concern here is the kind of message it will send to local Filipino journalists who may not have the same gravitas, the same popularity as Maria Ressa. Maria, one of the most high-profile journalists in the country, has been convicted today by a cyber libel case, a law that was signed by the previous administration, which journalists have been calling for decriminalization over the past few years. Kim.
Jamila, what's the reaction been there to Maria Ressa's libel guilty verdict?
Well, we've seen a lot of outrage, obviously. There has been very strong international support for Maria. There's also strong local support for Maria. A lot of local organizations, the Foreign Press Club, the National Union of Journalists of the Philippines, they say this shouldn't even be the priority of the government. You know, this is the first week that courts are opening after one of the longest, most strictest quarantine that's been imposed in the world, that's in the Philippines. And the priority was the promulgation of Maria's case along with 7 others. So basically, what people here are saying largely is that they criticize the priority of the government coupled with the anti-terror law that is expected to be signed by the president today. They're asking for priority on improving social justice services, social services, of course, at a time when there is a pandemic. Again, as we said, there is outrage, but there is also support for the government. The question, though, is how this can impact, again, local journalists who work for independent local newspapers who may not have the same support as Maria. It sends a very chilling message, especially in a country that is considered one of the most dangerous places in the world for journalists, Kim.
Thank you for that, Jamila Alandogan there live from Manila. Well, Phil Robertson is Deputy Asia Director of Human Rights Watch. He says the verdict sets a dangerous precedent for journalism in the Philippines.
The verdict actually highlights the ability of the Philippines' abusive President Rodrigo Duterte to manipulate laws to go after critical, well-respected media voices, and whatever the cost to the country. We think that the government should reverse this verdict. We think they should quash it, and they should step back. Unfortunately, what we're seeing is part of a well-played out plan by the government to try, as Maria Ressa said very clearly, to shut them down and to make them a cautionary tale to other journalists in the Philippines who would dare criticize the president. If you look at this case here in front of us, what happened was there was an article published. It was based in part on government documents. It was published 4 months before the cyber criminal law came onto the books. There was one change in the article afterwards, after the law was in effect, to essentially fix a typo. And the Philippines Department of Justice, with the encouragement of the president, went to the private litigant and said, look, you should sue, and came up with an entire new legal theory of continuous publication to enable this to happen. I mean, this is a targeted hit. There was a private petitioner, but it's really the government's behind it.